Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming. It really is. It's great to be back. It's great to be back at the great institution of the Literary Festival. I think we've all missed it. Some have vanished, some are dormant. So I think a big thanks to the organisers of this one, Andrew and Natalie, and Catherine and Seabag, for pressing ahead and bringing it back. I think, as the government might have said but didn't, we are here to speak out, to help out. Now we have an illustrious panel here today. Sadly, Camilla Tominey, who was due to be with us, can't be. She tested positive for the lurgy this morning and sends her best wishes. Maybe I'd start by saying, I'll introduce our fellow panelists. Firstly, Camilla Long here, who very eminent journalist at the Sunday Times. You will all know her. Columnist, interviewer, television critic. She's twice Interviewer of the Year at the British Press Awards, and is a must-read voice on every facet of modern life, and not least the monarchy. Here's her bracing take on last year's ITV documentary on Princess Anne's 70th birthday. The great pleasure of watching Anne is the fact you can always tell exactly what she's thinking. Twitter, bollocks. Hair, stupid. Sculptures, not worth the bloody time. I spent a year writing that programme, Camilla, and you nailed it in a paragraph. Sorry, I haven't said who I am, by the way. My name's Robert Hardman. I'm a writer, author. I make documentaries and when I'm not working for the Daily Mail. Our other panellist, everybody knows Andrew Wilson as obviously as A.N. Wilson. I think, along with A.N., his other moniker is prolific. He is the man who put the pro into prolific, I think. He's a biographer, Milton, Tolstoy, Victoria and Albert, among many others. He's a novelist, historian, polemicist, essayist, multiple award winner. It's great to have him here today. He's also one of the only people who has written acclaimed books on both Elizabethan ages, Mark I and Mark II. Of the latter, he wrote, "The modern Elizabethan age is a period in which the majority of the British have basked in comfort and security. All in all, when one compares the cold, the poverty, the sheer misery of 1952 Britain with the Britain of today, the improvement is as amazing as anything the Victorians achieved, and yet it would be a bold person who stood up and said that the past half-century had been Britain's most glorious period." So we'll come on to that in a minute. I mean, I suppose I should begin by saying that today's theme was actually devised long ago with an eye on next year's Platinum Jubilee, 70 years, first Platinum Jubilee we've ever had. Events of recent days may have given us all cause to ask if we are perhaps demanding or expecting a bit too much of our Queen in the light of her decision to cancel this week's trip to Northern Ireland and the news that she's been in hospital this week. But in wishing her all best wishes for a speedy recovery, already underway, we're told, I would also point you to her excellent response earlier this week when she politely declined the Oldie of the Year award. As you may have read, she said, "No, thank you. You're only as old as you feel, and I don't meet the criteria." So who are we to argue with that? With that, I think let's address the issue. How will history look back on the Elizabethan age? Will it even call it an Elizabethan age? When the present Queen came to the throne, everybody talked about a new Elizabethan age. It was the thing. But has her reign been too long, simply too long, to be categorised in an easy, meaningful way? I mean, whichever metrics you choose, it has been an extraordinary span of time. Half the countries on earth didn't exist when she came to the throne. There was no Zambia, there was no Ghana. They were Northern Rhodesia and Gold Coast. She was crowned Queen of Ceylon. Sri Lanka wasn't Sri Lanka. We had two Germanys. We had one Yugoslavia. Or you could look at it in terms of life expectancy. In her first year as Queen, she sent out 395 100th birthday cards to centenarians. Last year she sent out more than 16,000. So it gives you an idea of just what an extraordinary reign this has been. So how will we come to view her age? And it is our age, after all, for we are all modern Elizabethans. So perhaps, Andrew, if I could turn to you first, because, as I said, you've written about the first Elizabethan age and the current Elizabethan age. Will future historians look back on this Elizabethan era through the prism of progress or decline?
Well, I suppose one of the things about the past of this country is that it's made sense in the past to define it in terms of the head of state and to name something the Georgian age or Victorian age or whatever it may be. And although I think the Queen has done as good a job as you could possibly expect of anybody as a constitutional monarch, I really do think that, and I share Robert's hope that she goes on forever. It is a time in which deference, hierarchy, not just the House of Lords, but the whole structure of British society has changed. And therefore, it makes less sense in many people's minds, I think, to define ourselves in terms of who the monarch is. But, and as you say, the change, historically speaking, that's overcome the world since the 1950s is so enormous and it's been so much more rapid. We haven't mentioned the whole business of the web and internet and everything else utterly changing the world. So it's really impossible to know, really, whether we would be looked back upon as Elizabethans or just those people before the robots or the Chinese or whoever they may be take control. Those weird cave-like people.
Which is your favourite, Elizabeth I or II?
My favourite head of state in any era, in any history, is Elizabeth I.
Right.
So far, and I don't think you can't really imagine a cleverer, more original, stranger person being a head of state than Queen Elizabeth I. So it's a very, very unfair comparison. But of course, I revere the present Queen. Of course we do, yes.
Camilla, can I ask you, what does modern Elizabethanism mean to you? Is it good or bad?
A sort of mixed bag, really. I suppose, I would say this as a television critic, but I think that the single most important invention, the single most impactful new thing that has changed the way that we all view the royal family is the arrival of television. And Prince Philip recognised it, the Queen eventually recognised it, and she was the first Queen, obviously, to actively use the television as a means of communicating with her subjects. I think we've seen over the past few decades that this is both a blessing and really quite a major curse. Because as the royal family has moved out of, I don't think we can remotely really say that they are political figures with serious political influence anymore, although I believe that the Queen does have some sway over her prime ministers, who after all she sees every week. I think she is more, she's more ornamental. She is a decoration in a way, not to be, not to do her down, but it is, it is ornamental and decorative. And as a result, we look to them now for social guidance more than anything else. We look to them now to see what they're doing in their lives, to see who they're marrying, how they behave when they marry these people. I think it's all ridiculous. I think it's outrageous that we have these poor people who we kind of play with in terms of, who they fall in love with and everything. But that is what's happened, and I think that's why, we're glued to these big set-piece interviews over the last few decades have really become such an important way of us understanding what royal life is. And I think they've been quite detrimental, really, to the way that the royal family has been perceived, because I don't think any of these big set-piece interviews have helped them or come across well in any way. So I think, sadly, it's been a sort of, double-edged sword for the Queen, because she knows that she cannot possibly communicate with her huge number of subjects without engaging with this. But, then we're with Oprah, who's loving it.
It is fascinating that the Queen and TV are exactly the same age.
Yeah.
John Logie Baird, I think, actually fired up his apparatus, which was originally called the televisor, in January 1926, and shortly afterwards the Queen was born. So they are as one. Tell me, do you think it was a mistake? I mean, I ask this as someone who makes the odd royal documentary. Should she never have done any royal documentaries?
I think
Should I be out of a job on that front?
No. I think there's no alternative, is there? How can, or you just become, the sort of the Archduchess of Liechtenstein or something like that.
Exactly.
That's not.
I totally agree with you, Camilla, about well, for example, the one that everybody always trots out, the disaster of the film in which they were having barbecues in the Highlands and so on. But nonetheless, against that, I would think that she carried on George V's tradition of a Christmas broadcast. And although it seems very peculiar in some ways that people should suddenly go into a different room and watch the Queen when they're cooking the turkey, usually we're told, Robert would tell us whether it's true or not, reading something she's written herself. And it's usually very holy, and most of us aren't holy anymore. And she usually tells us why she's a Christian. And I find it incredibly moving and impressive that she does speak direct suddenly. It's her speaking.
It is.
I don't know what conclusions anybody in this room will come to after we've been whittering on for an hour, but she does communicate. She does use the telly. It's not just that she's...
absolutely.
I mean, I agree with you, all the stuff you imply where they are all victims of the telly, so that all these programmes with Harry Enfield and the Prince of Wales, and you can't tell the difference after a while because you've watched all these sort of spoofs and satires and things. And they are obviously, everybody who appears in public it becomes addicted to it in a funny kind of way. They want, some of the more trivial members of the royal family actually want to appear in the papers all the time and all their sordid love affairs and everything else to be known. They do. But as Robert and I both know, having worked at the Daily Mail, and the late Nigel Dempster's telephone rang every single morning with various members of the royal family ringing up with stories about either themselves or their relations. But
sadly, it doesn't work like that anymore.
But the Queen is the only person in the royal family who's actually seized the medium of television for 5 minutes a year or whatever it is, and used it in this rather strange way.
It's very interesting you mention her, the Christmas broadcast and the religious dimension of it, because actually, if you look at her Christmas broadcast early on in the reign, there's nothing religious at all. They're almost a sort of travelogue.
Exactly.
It's this year we went to India or we went to Kenya. And it's really only in the 21st century, it's actually since 9/11 it starts, suddenly this sort of spiritual dimension comes in. And I remember talking to the last Archbishop of Canterbury about this, Rowan Williams, who'd picked up on this. And he said he felt it was her way of readdressing the balance as society became more secular and less godly. It was sort of her way of sticking a bit of sort of God back in the mix. I mean, she is the only major national lay public figure, if you like, who's entirely comfortable talking about her faith. And
she does it so much better. I accept Rowan Williams from this because he's sort of a special person. But apart from that, the bishops have been an absolute shower since 1952.
I knew you'd say that at some point. I just knew you would.
She does. She should. I would. If I, there was a move to make Charles I double up as the Archbishop of Canterbury and King. And I would have made her Archbishop of Canterbury when Rowan Williams, because she does it so well.
Yeah.
Rather than giving us their boring views, which the bishops think is their job, she just delivers the stuff.
She has been the most, correct me if I'm wrong, and you're much better on church matters than I am, but I think she's been the most, well, she's been the most diligent supreme governor of the Church of England since, you tell me. But
I would say since it was started. If, like me, you consider it having been started by Henry VIII. Obviously, if you think it was started by our Lord and Saviour, then...
No, I think we'll go back. The Reformation's far enough back.
Then she has some rivals. But no, she's the person who's taken it most seriously.
But if she's so good at it, why is it in such decline?
I think it's partly what Robert says, it's a reaction. No, it is in decline, and she surely, I don't know her, obviously, Robert does, you do probably,
I wish
but
I did,
whether she's fully aware of quite what a catastrophic decline it is, both as an institution and Christianity in general. People just don't even know what it is, let alone believe in it. But I don't think we couldn't blame the decline of Christianity in the West on the poor widow of Windsor. We really couldn't.
Well, I mean, we could try.
We could try, but I'm not going to start trying.
No.
She has. I mean, you just take something like the Maundy, Royal Maundy. It's one of her favourite things in the calendar every Maundy Thursday when she
Yes.
goes and doles out Maundy money to what was originally the poor. In fact, the monarchs used to have to wash their feet. I think the last foot washer was James II, and then monarchs sort of decided they didn't really want to wash anyone's feet. And then after that, they pretty much stopped turning up at all until the Queen's grandfather, George V, resumed the sort of this tradition on an occasional basis. But she is, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but I mean, she is the first monarch to do it every year. First monarch, I think, since
Yes.
King John to do it every year.
I think she is, yes.
And also has moved it around the country, so it's not just stuck at Westminster Abbey. She's now
No, she went
taken
around
it to
all
every,
the cathedrals, didn't she?
Yeah.
And then I think she invented, or perhaps George VI invented. I love traditions which have been. Do you remember? You're all too young. John Betjeman had this wonderful teleprogram called Metroland, and my favourite moment in it was program was made in about 1970. He went out into the suburbs and he said, the Croxley Green Revels, a tradition that stretches back to 1956. But anyway, the Maundy money, when you watch it, it looks as if it stretches back to the Middle Ages, but in fact it was invented by George VI.
Oh, wonderful.
On. And it's a good one, isn't it?
It's a very good one. I mean, they get the yeomen of the guard to carry these gold trays with little purses with Maundy money on them, and I mean, it does look...
Is it those little chocolate coins you get? I don't know what you get when you have one of those.
They're specially minted, and they usually appear on eBay within about half an hour. There's these grateful recipients. In the old days, they would go off and buy themselves a bit of cloth to wear and some food, but these days they just stick them straight on eBay.
I wonder if she quite cleverly realised that, whilst I believe she does have deep faith, but it's the same thing, isn't it? She always says, seen to be believed. And, you know, I think in the modern world, there's probably diminishing opportunity for a monarch to be seen out and about. She can't have a jubilee every year. And I would imagine attending church, being in church, Maundy money, all of it is probably the best way for her to... Again, it's about communication and, you know, it's
absolutely.
You know, perhaps not...
And another thing, going back to what Robert said at the beginning, and you've both agreed, I would totally agree with both of you, the political role of the monarchy is very, very hard to define if it has one at all. I think it does have one. I hope we have time to say what it is. But I think she could well have thought to herself, maybe the only role which is absolutely unambiguous is that I'm the supreme governor of this diminishing band of people called the Church of England.
Yeah.
But even, she's not really very Anglican. I think she's mainly Christian, isn't she, rather than Anglican.
I mean, yeah, I would say.
Camilla, you mentioned there, you talked about her I need to be seen to be believed, one of her great sayings. How, for someone whose entire sort of existence depends on being seen, obviously a pandemic was a major threat to her whole modus vivendi. How do you think she's handled the last couple of years? I mean, you know, particularly maybe how's the monarchy done versus how's the government done through the pandemic? I mean, have we been lucky to have her?
I certainly think that when she came out, I don't know if you all remember, she came out after 3 months of hiding in Windsor. Not hiding, sorry, being in Windsor. It was actually, for a gnarly old, not particularly a monarchist, it was actually a real relief to see her. And she came out, I think, and she knighted that man whose name I've forgotten.
Sir Tom Moore.
Yes, sorry.
Captain Tom, who
Captain
became
Tom.
Brigadier Tom, or possibly Field Marshal Tom.
Yes, I know.
At the time.
Saint Tom.
Saint Tom.
Yeah. And it was a moment where you did feel, oh, well, they're still here. You know, there's continuity here. And I think as a monarch, she definitely, you know, obviously 70 years into her reign or whatever it is now, she's continuity is the big thing that and even when she's been going through all these sort of terrible troubles, you can imagine her just sort of coming in and just thinking, oh, what's this now? You know, well, we're going to wait for 24 hours and not do anything. We're not going to react like we're 14 or freak out or anything like that. And I thought was particularly cool after the Harry and Meghan interview was that all of her advisors wanted her to respond immediately and say something and, you know, sort of be very kind of modern media about it. And she didn't. She just said, oh, we'll sleep on it, and put out a statement the next day, which was so short and so brilliantly worded. And you do think, you know, even if you know, don't particularly support the idea of her or her, you do think that she really nails it. And it is remarkable that all these innovations have come in and her life has changed so much, and yet she still understands how to play big crowds much better than anybody else in the royal family. Nobody else understands how to do it. And I find it remarkable that this quite shy, probably, plain, little dutiful woman actually understands something that's quite bizarre and creative and not at all what she's like. And I don't know where that comes from. Perhaps it's, you know...
Possibly, yes, she's always put it down to training, I think. You know,
yes, she just knows what the rules to stick to.
Can I ask you both for possibly to pick out a moment where she... I'll stop asking a moment where she sort of been entirely captured the spirit of the age, sort of been the spirit of the age, and then possibly come on to a moment where she's been completely out of kilter with the spirit of the age. I mean, the one that occurs to me where she's absolutely just sort of been entirely in tune with her people. Well, maybe two. One was the Bond video at the start of the 2012 Olympics. Just brilliant, you know. Bond arrives, you probably all remember it, James Bond arrives at the palace and you see him sort of walking through, and then there's a sort of figure at a desk and you think, oh, it's obviously going to be a sort of, you know, double, it's going to be some actress, and it turns out, my God, it really is the Queen, you know, and she goes, good evening, Mr. Bond. And it's just extraordinary. I mean, the whole world went, ye gods, and I was covering that opening ceremony on the night, and I was in the press box, and it was full of hundreds, thousands possibly, of journalists from all over the world. And the next day, the headlines were not Olympic Open in London or so-and-so wins this race. It was Queen jumps out of helicopter. And I think that was one moment. And another great moment that sort of where she's absolutely got it occurred in 1970 in Wellington in New Zealand, where she was arriving at the City Hall and suddenly veered off the red carpet and went over to talk to some totally gobsmacked women in the crowd. And Prince Philip went the other way and went up to two long-haired youths and said, you bumming around? and the greeting line of civic worthies, we go, what the hell is going on? And it was that moment the Queen had invented the walkabout. That was the first walkabout, and it's been going strong ever since. So maybe, Camilla, is there a moment that for you where she's just been on the money? I'm going
to say one incident, which is both of them, which I think is actually, you know, reflective of the modern situation that we found ourselves in. I think the week after Diana died, she was both on the money and completely off it at the same time.
Interesting.
I think that, you know, obviously I don't need to explain why she seemed off it at the time. You know, there were thousands of people panting for her to show some, what was it, show some pity.
Show us you care, ma'am,
show us
said
you
the
care,
front page of the Daily Mirror, yes.
But looking back at it, 20 years later, it now seems ridiculous and, you know, not to diminish what had actually happened, but it was a mad hysteria. Her immediate reaction, which is just to keep calm and carry on, was the reaction that has served her so well and was probably the correct reaction in retrospect, is quiet dignity, not breaking protocol, continuing with what she knew and she knew the royal family was about. And instead, probably manipulated by Tony Blair, she sort of opened the door to a different type of monarchy and a different world, and the celebrity world and the world of mass hysteria and mass overreaction, of instant gratification and wanting everything to be all right immediately, and looking to the people who look after us to solve problems for us. And I think that's obviously today a huge problem that we're all dealing with, and we expect, you know, people to immediately jump to it and do what we want and solve problems immediately and make the pandemic go away and stop us having to take, you know, tests and vaccines and everything. And actually, it was interesting. We didn't know what was happening then when it was happening, but it was. And I think she instinctively knew it, that it was nonsense, really. And that she wanted to stick to, what we just touched on, the traditions that she had been brought up with, that she knew would see her through.
Andrew, could I ask?
And also, I just want to add to what Camilla said. I totally agree with both sides. That it was both on the sort of Daily Mirror-ish side, it was a blunder from her point of view. It was the right thing to do. And one thing that we now know on anecdotal evidence was part of the formula, which of course we, the gutter press, were forgetting, was she was protecting two little boys from all the publicity. But I'm going to remember her. Was it, you know everything about her, was it her first big broadcast when she was 21, which was delivered in South Africa?
Yeah.
Well, her very first, she actually had the longest broadcasting career of anyone in the world ever, because her first one was 80 years ago, age 14, when she did that broadcast in the Second World War.
Oh, yes.
She said, "Come along, Margaret."
Children
Let's
of
say,
yes,
yeah,
I love
very
that.
sweet.
Yeah.
But anyway, in
yes,
South Africa, she said,
Africa.
my whole life, whether it be long
Long
or
or
short,
short.
will be devoted to service. And indeed, it was to the service of the empire, as it was in those days.
Our great imperial
And
family.
she became the queen in Africa, in Kenya. And I think what, for me, defines her in a way, almost more than the church stuff we've talked about, is that unlike so many politicians, particularly conservative politicians, she understood what was happening with the breakup of the empire and the movement of peoples across the world. And I think of two instances. One was when Mr. Macmillan said, "You mustn't go near the Gold Coast. That man Nkrumah is a communist. He's a dangerous person, mustn't go there." And she went there, and not only did she meet him, but she danced.
Yeah.
She didn't need to say anything. She danced around the room with this dangerous commie. And then you fast forward in time, and Mrs. Thatcher, almost alone actually among decent opinion, and she was a decent person, thought that it was all right to go on protecting the apartheid regime by not imposing sanctions. And the Queen let it be known through persons such as yourself that she disapproved of the Thatcherite policy, and she befriended Mandela. And when he came to this country, obviously one of the greatest men of the 20th century, there she was as his sort of partner. And I think that the Commonwealth, strange as it seems to us, as a kind of child of the empire, is actually one of the great success stories, and she has been the author of it, really.
Yeah, no, it's extraordinary that when she came to the throne, there were 8 members of the Commonwealth, and now there are, I think, 54.
Yeah.
And it's had its ups and downs, and it's not as important as it was, clearly. But
it's as a symbolic thing, it's very important.
It is.
And here,
yeah.
particularly since 1952 or 3, whatever date we choose, we've become a multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multi-everything society. It's terribly important, I think, that she is in touch with all those parts of the world from which so many of our fellow citizens now come. And I think that's a terrific thing. And I don't think an ordinary prime minister who's only lasted 5 or 10 years could possibly have done that, or a president.
No, I think you talk to any Commonwealth leader, particularly the ones who've been there the sort of longest serving ones, and they would all agree that actually without her, it probably would have fallen apart.
Yeah.
Possibly in the 60s, around UDI with Rhodesia, possibly during the Thatcher era. She was the one who held it together, and really did have a feel for it. I mean, she knew all these founding fathers. Prince Charles, actually, he sort of grew up around them as well. He could still sort of remember water skiing with Dom Mintoff, or Nkrumah, you mentioned. He remembers meeting him as a boy. But yes, I think that's a very important part of who she is, what she is. That the fact that she did become queen up a fig tree in the Aberdare National Park in Kenya. I mean, I think that's to a large part of the Commonwealth. They do feel that she's sort of grown up with them. The empire had only come to an end 5 years before she came to the throne. So it is interesting that she's the first monarch in our history. Every previous monarch came to the throne with an expectation that they would rule and reign and expand and consolidate and be strong and grow this empire thing. And she was the first one who came to the throne with a specific expectation that she would sort of hand it all back, that she would make it smaller and decline. It's been a very different sort of career path.
But actually,
really.
I mean, going back to what you said about the church, she's done that. She's presided over what she must have known after about 1965 was going to be a diminishing band. The empire no longer exists, and all that's a diminishing band. And the hierarchical world into which she was born. I mean, the reason nice old Lord Altrincham got punched in the face is he said that she was Tweedy and that the court was composed of sort of fuddy-duddies, and why wasn't it more socially and racially and otherwise mixed? The answer is her mother was a Scottish aristocrat. She grew up in a kind of country house world like this house. And she lived in an incredibly narrow and hierarchical world when she was born. And she's watched all that implode and no longer exists, really.
Do you think that the Commonwealth, I mean, yes, it's been an amazing thing for her to continue and build herself. But you could also say it was a sort of extension of the fantasy of the empire, which now no longer exists in the real world.
Yes.
I mean, is it a toy set?
You could say that both, couldn't you? And I'm not being modest, because it's against my nature, but I genuinely don't know what the truth there is, and possibly a bit of both.
I think a bit of both. I think it's been for those who still cling, or in the 50s were still talking of empire, had to be gently talked down off the sort of empire cliff, and it was a way of doing that. Well, it was a sort of face-saving mechanism, while at the same time actually being very helpful for these very new democracies that were just emerging. Up until then, they were getting rid of their governor in his ostrich-plumed hat, and suddenly they had a parliament, and they were becoming nations in a hurry. And the Commonwealth, I think, was a very useful structure for that.
I think also you have to remember the grander context in which this was all happening. It was the great expansion of global travel in the jet age, and it seemed incredibly glamorous that she would go to the Solomon Islands. I think now, and this is why I'm curious about it, royals going and visiting tribes in the Pacific Ocean doesn't look so good. It doesn't look so modern and is so up to date.
And there's a very grave danger of it looking like an echo of the old bad days, as well, rather than the good old days, and being patronising and all that. But at the same time, we don't want to make this a sycophantic exercise, but I mean, I think the younger generation of the royal family have sort of got that, and I think sort of some of them. And
I think we're in danger of looking at it very much through sort of UK-centric eyes and thinking, oh, it looks a bit bad. I mean, don't forget, she's actually been elected effectively monarch in Papua New Guinea, 1973. Papua New Guinea was an Australian mandate. It was about to go independent. It had been handed a sort of oven-ready constitution with a president, and they actually turned around and went, we don't really want a president. We've got 800 different languages. We can't agree on anything. Could we have the Queen?
It must be said, Papua New Guinea is one of the most conservative countries in the world. But yes, absolutely.
So I mean, they love having her there. I mean, she is Mrs. Quinn, and that's.
I mean, I don't doubt that, having watched the coronation, this amazing cavalcade of robes and jewels and sceptres and holiness, that so many people across the globe would totally be voting for her to be Mrs. Queen.
Particularly the argument for, I slightly share your not 100% monarchism, but the argument for being a monarchist is when you look at the alternatives. And when you think, who would be our equivalent of Chancellor Merkel or President Macron? And it would be Tony Blair all over again, or it would be something even worse.
It literally would be Simon Cowell.
Or Simon Cowell.
I would probably take the Queen.
And that's where we start to see the point of George V and Queen Mary and things, don't we?
Well, we haven't got that much longer before I'm going to throw it open to questions, but and I'll turn to you, Camilla, on this. But I mean, frankly, what we say or write will have probably pretty little bearing on how future generations come to view this age. I think that the person whose impressions will last longest, perhaps I regret, but is one Peter Morgan. He's the man who professes to have no interest in the Queen at all, but has gone on to write an Oscar-winning film about a West End play about her, and has spent the last 5 years writing The Crown. And that is now, to a large part of the planet, that is the settled narrative of this reign. And maybe, Camilla, I could start by asking you, I mean, has the Crown, A, has it been good for the Queen, and B, is it a fair reflection of the age that defines her?
Oh my God, yes. They should be, Peter Morgan should be sending the royal family an invoice, frankly. It's been amazing. I mean, I know in the last series, poor Prince Charles put out a little thing saying, but none of it's true. And
fair enough.
You just think, yes, well, I mean, that's sort of the point, isn't it? I think it's been amazing for the royal. It's been fascinating, and I think some of it's a bit hacky. And I rewatched the Queen again recently, and I'm not going to mince my words. It's a completely awful film. But I think that it's like James Bond, isn't it? It's brand Britain, and it's, you know, people buying into us, you know, the UK as an idea, as a concept, as a nation. And I think from that point of view, it's brilliant, and it is well made and well written. But you know, I suppose it is probably a bit galling for them to watch it and watch stuff that they've never said and never even happened that way. But, you know, that's the deal, isn't it? Unless you're going to, you know, it's always been the convention that people sort of slightly write what they want. And, you know,
yes,
within reason. I mean, obviously not.
Although I think all historic figures can expect to be dramatised at some point. I think it's pretty unusual normally we wait until they're dead. It's pretty unusual to make a programme about someone who's still in office. I can't imagine you do one about a serving president of the US, and I think their lawyers would be on to you.
I mean, you know, I suppose it's satire, but, you know, current politicians are constantly, you know, they're imagining
and I think
what they're saying the whole time.
Andrew, what's your take on the Crown? Good or bad for her?
I want Camilla to write a book now about the popularity of the real Queen, because when the tragedy occurred in the Paris underpass, Dominic Lawson wrote a column in the Sunday Times saying, the Queen has always been revered, but she's never been loved, and Diana is loved. And I think most people knew what he meant, even if they didn't agree with him. Now, I don't think that's true. I think the Queen is loved, and I think, I'm certainly looking into my own bosom when I say this, but I think we're loving Claire Foy. I really do. I think Claire Foy is one of the most lovable human beings on the planet. I've never met the lady, but I just...
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
But she managed to do the Queen's voice, but she made herself vulnerable, and when she looked in anguish out of the window and saw her husband coming back drunk after a night out on the tiles, everybody wanted to go murder Prince Philip. On the other hand, and you asked my response to the Crown itself, I don't entirely share Camilla's view that it doesn't matter whether it's true or false, and in particular, poor old Prince Philip. I think there was one episode which was positive wickedness on behalf of the Crown, and that was the one which implied that poor Prince Philip, whose great family tragedy was that almost the entire family was wiped out in an air accident when they were coming over here for a wedding. And the Crown made it seem that they were coming over because he'd been so badly behaved at Gordonstoun. He wasn't, he was the head boy, he was a model pupil at Gordonstoun. And they made it seem as though his family were coming over to try and remonstrate with this stroppy teenager, and that he had, in effect, been responsible for their death. I mean, that's a terrible thing to do for any human being, even if they are Prince Philip, who we always think is robust and hit back and so on.
He was very upset by that particular episode.
I think also the fact of what actually happened, which was that they all died in an air crash, surely that is dramatic
enough. It's much
enough.
more dramatic and
much more
interesting.
Do you need more?
It's much more interesting. And also it made... if you'd had the real story, it would have made much more dramatic... it would have had a much more dramatic punch that what happened next when he had to go to Germany in the 30s, where so many of his family were caught up in the horror story of the Third Reich.
I think his life at the beginning
walked in a funeral procession with Goering and so on, he wasn't wearing all the rubbish, but all the Nazi regalia. That would have been a really good episode. So I really do think that's 0 out of 10 for The Crown. But I share your view, both of you. The future will look back and it'll be very hard to distinguish truth from falsehood. Just as if you asked me about the reign of Richard II or the reign of Henry IV, I entirely base my thoughts about those reigns on Shakespeare. And I'm not suggesting the fellow you named his name, I've already forgotten, Peter something,
Peter Morgan,
is the same as Shakespeare. But
yeah.
But you do remember drama, of course you do. And you particularly remember Claire Foy, her face. You do. There's something very special about
I'm going to throw it open to questions very shortly. I'm just going to ask one question of my guest here, which is eminent Elizabethans. Who, and I'm sure you're probably working on that book already, Andrew. But I mean, who? Give me 1 or 2 figures of the age who, to you, sum up or will be looked back upon as quintessential Elizabethans.
Can I choose one from the beginning and one from the middle of the reign? Well, one from the beginning, I'm puffing my own book, which is called The King and the Christmas Tree. It's the Queen was related to the King of Norway during the war. He was married to her great-aunt, Maud, and he embodied, Haakon VII of Norway, embodied the idea of what I imagine most people in this room believe in, which is free speech, parliamentary democracy, but enshrined in a constitutional monarchy. And when the Germans marched into the neighbouring country of Denmark, they lasted 6 hours and handed over to the Nazi authorities. When they came to Haakon VII, and they said, we've got to tell you, your new Prime Minister is a very nice man called Mr. Quisling. He replied in robust terms, fuck off, basically. He went off into the snows. He was my age. And he took the entire government and the entire gold reserve, and he saved the face of Norway. But he also did enormous amount of good during the war, because the Germans relied on iron ore coming out of Norway to build their bombs and vessels, and that was all very much interrupted by their commandos, and the Norwegian merchant navy was supplying the Allies with fuel. There were many, many reasons, but the real treasure he took out was the idea that, like George V, like George VI, like Queen Elizabeth II, he was only there because he believed in the principle that the Prime Minister of Norway was not Mr. Quisling, but was the man the Norwegians had elected. So he's my Elizabethan number 1, and he came to the coronation, and of course, adulation. But the other one, without any doubt for me, is Nelson Mandela. Mm-hmm. Because he was her ally, really. He saw the same truth, that you don't necessarily get what you want in the world by killing people or fighting for it. You get it because you believe in it.
It was very interesting when Barack Obama at Shimon Peres's funeral was addressing the whole theme of leadership, and he picked out 2 giants of post-war leadership, global leadership, and they were Mandela and the Queen. And Mandela, of course, was the only person who could actually call her Elizabeth and get away with it. I would love to have been in the room when he came in one day to see her and went, "Oh, Elizabeth, you've lost weight." You're the only person who's ever said that. And
she would have loved it. Wishes other people said it more.
Camilla, let me ask you: who are your Elizabethans?
Well, 2 quick ones. I think Paul McCartney and Stephen Hawking from Arts and Sciences. But I was trying to think of a politician who has really chimed with her and she really loved. And it's quite interesting because I don't really think that she really got on with the big beasts. Certainly not Margaret Thatcher, really. And certainly Tony Blair wasn't a terribly happy thing. But I think that the politician who loves her and just wants to appear in the Bond video with her forever and ever and ever is, of course, Boris. And and I think one of his great powers as a politician is that he just transmits that very, very easily. And we just know that they must have a roaring time every week. And they're just talking about, you know, celebs and who's a tit and, you know, who did what in the cabinet and what's Pretty doing, and, you know, that she must love a goss.
Excellent. Well, listen, I've gone on too long. Forgive me.
You've got 8 minutes and 40 seconds, guys.
I originally thought that was going the other way. Can I ask does anyone have a question who they'd like to ask? Yes, there.
My question is, what do you think will happen with Prince Charles? Sorry, can everybody hear me now? My question is, what do you think will happen with Prince Charles? Because I find he's very aloof, and unlike the Queen, he doesn't seem to be using the media quite as successfully. So it's just really what you think.
So from the Elizabethan age to the future, the Carlist age, Camilla, what do you think will define the age of Prince Charles?
Oh, I think shaky times are ahead. I think it's going to be very difficult. I think what's going to happen immediately is obviously people are going to be in deep shock, upset, mourning that she has gone. And it will be a real test of him to see how he handles that and pushes on through it and deals with it. I think he's possibly not up to it, I'm afraid. Even though I think he has merits in other areas, I don't think that he is good at grand gestures or rising above things and not being petty. So I think it is going to be difficult. And I think, in a way, it will, you kind of sort of wonder then what will happen after that. And it will probably, be quite quickly on to William, maybe. Sounds awful,
Andrew,
doesn't it?
what's
Well,
your...
I mean, I'm not a doctor, but you're presuming that Prince Charles is going to die after the Queen rather than before the Queen.
On that basis, let's
That's
take
a
that.
terrifying thought.
I'm not making that assumption at all.
But if you were looking
Well,
ahead to a possible Carlist age, how would it...
For a start, he'd be crazy to call himself Charles III, because that would start an absolute riot in Scotland. They've already had Charles III in the 18th century. So he'd have to be George VII or something of that kind. He wouldn't be as bad as everyone in this room in their heart of hearts thinks he will be. He'd be better. People rise to these occasions. And he'd have a lot of people, including his excellent second wife, holding him back from some of the more idiotic things he probably thinks he was going to do. And I think it will be fine, actually.
I'm with you on that. I think she's been the longest reigning monarch. He's been the longest serving heir to the throne. I think he has given it a bit of thought.
Yeah.
I think he'll be.
But also,
I think there's an incumbency factor. I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised.
But that good old phrase, "Why worry? It may never happen."
Okay. Another question over that.
I think the panel's done a marvellous job. Camilla, you mentioned continuity, and you've talked about symbolism and so forth. But looking at the monarchy, I mean, I've spent the last 50 years in America, and I was educated by, amongst others, Andrew Roberts at Oxford, in history. So I look about it in America. They like the Queen and the royal family more than they ever did. And they don't even particularly like Meghan anymore because they've seen through that particular aspect. But so in a sense, we've been very lucky that the Queen is the symbolic head of this country, has given it stature and given it charisma that it might otherwise have lacked. A bad prime minister can kill a reputation overnight, whereas the Queen, as you said, Camilla, provides a continuity. So I think we're very lucky. I mean, if any of you have been to America, and because you're English, it's not a handicap. And we owe that to the royal family and the projection of some of the virtues of the royal family and England. So I think
agree
we'll
with that,
miss
but
her.
speaking as somebody who has 3 American grandchildren, I think it's all right for them to fantasize and hardly tell the difference. They're being a bit like me between the crown and the real thing. But they wouldn't necessarily want to have a monarchy back. If you say, fine, in that case, we'll forget about 1776 and our differences, and we'll forget we've read Andrew Roberts' excellent biography of George III, and would you like to come back and be one of our colonies? I think the only state in the Union that would say yes would be Texas. That's my guess.
You were probably in the States in 1976, perhaps, when the 200th, when the Queen went over. I mean, that was an extraordinary time. To go to your point, Britain was an absolute basket case. We were near bankrupt. We were a joke. Everything was going wrong. And yet we had her. And when she arrived in Philadelphia and then toured up the East Coast, it was sort of putting Britain back on the map. I couldn't agree more. I think, particularly when we've been in the doldrums, we've been lucky to have her.
We might have taken the royal family over Trump, actually.
I think many of us might have made that choice, actually.
George III's eminent biographer is nudging me here to say that we've got one more question, and then I think we're going to have to round it off because someone... Yes, at the back there, sorry.
You've mentioned the Church of England's massive problems. Do you think the establishment of the Church will survive the next reign?
Very interesting. Maybe start with Andrew on that.
Well, in short, no. I don't see how it can. For reasons too elaborate to explain in 1 minute, but I just don't see how it possibly can. Nor is there any justification when only about 1% of the population is practicing Anglican to have the bishops in the House of Lords. It's absurd.
You don't think the Prince Charles's stated aim to be a defender of faith rather than the faith?
Faiths, he said plural. I don't know what that means. I'm in that position when
the Queen said something
Prince
similar in 2012 at the start of her Diamond Jubilee. She talked about how it was the sort of duty of Anglicanism not just to defend the Church of England, but to defend all the faith in this country.
Yes, well, I think there's an element. We've talked about why we think there's an element of truth in it with her, in her case. But honestly, most people in this country are secular. And I just don't see any reason, justification, historical movement which suggests that an established Church of England, in which most practicing Anglicans don't believe, incidentally, how that can possibly survive.
Camilla, do you think?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Charles were a total atheist. I mean, I genuinely think that. I think he's not hugely interested in religion, whatever he said. Doesn't believe it. It's not like
it's no disqualification from belonging to the Church of England.
I can't quite see the time there. Don't worry. There we go. I think we've got time for one more, actually. Yeah, very quick one. Anybody else? Right, I'm going to ask a very quick one of you two, which is the one thing that sums up the Elizabethan age. Actually, Camilla, you've already touched on television. I'm going to go completely off to one side. I asked the panel beforehand, I said, can you just think of something? What defines Elizabethanism in the same way that the Aspidistra or the Crystal Palace defines Victoriana? I'm going to say Elizabethan age, it's either the referendum, we didn't have referenda at all until this age, or Tupperware. Which it sort of combines convenience, technology, thrift, and we know that the Queen likes having... She keeps her cereal in Tupperware.
I definitely think the handbag with the tiara.
Andrew, is this something that we're going to look back on and go, yes, that's Elizabethan?
The contraceptive pill, I think.
Okay.
Because, I mean, after that, human life changed, not only for women, but sex itself changed because people could realise it wasn't just for procreation, and therefore homosexuality became legal. Lots of other things came about because of that invention, in my opinion.
Okay.
I
Camilla,
can't really better that.
Well, and we mentioned television earlier.
Yeah, TV, yeah.
Well, listen, with that in mind, I think we have to hand over to the next speaker, but I'd very much like to thank my guests here, Camilla Long and Andrew Wilson. Andrew will be in the bookshop in a minute signing his book. I will, anyone wants one of those, I'll be signing it too. But thank you all very much for coming. It's been a great start to what I'm sure will be a great weekend, and I hope you have a very good rest of the festival. So thank you.